Hey guys, welcome to the Tetra Health and Performance Podcast. Welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to be tackling things from injury to rehab to return to play and even having success after return to play. Today we're lucky enough to be joined with our guest Simon Hall, who's going to be helping us navigate this topic today. I'd like to welcome you, Simon. Thank you very much for joining us today. Would you like to start off with just introducing yourself and let us know a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for having me. Any opportunity to get on my soapbox and talk health. I've grown up in Sydney, born in England, actually moved here when I was 3, and knew pretty early on through high school that I wanted to be a physio just through kind of a few injuries myself and bits and pieces like that. Did everything that was needed to be done to get to uni and to make that dream a reality. And since graduating uni about 8 years ago now, I've worked always in musculoskeletal and sporting physio. So I've always worked in private practices, and then I've worked with sports teams through most of that journey as well. So I did a little bit with semi-professional soccer early. I did 3 years with semi-professional AFL through at Sydney Uni. And I've spent the past 3 or so years with the Sydney Kings in the NBL with professional basketball. And then in amongst that, I've always kept up, like I said, the private practice client base, seeing just about everybody from every walk of life, and a big, contingent of people that I've seen and through relationships that I've built. And the type of people I like seeing are people that go to gyms and things like that, and who are, taking charge of their own health and trying to stay on top of things as best as they can in this chaotic world. So yeah, that's more or less me.
Right, you're always learning, right? So I can imagine that what you take from the more athletic populations, you can then use with the more general population, and then vice versa, right?
Most definitely. And I think that it's a question I get from young physios. Like, we take a lot of students at our clinic and student interns through the Kings, and a big question I always get is like the difference between general pop and athletes. And it's less than you think. And as cheesy and Disney Channel as it sounds, like, we are all people, and we all suffer from the same sort of stuff, all in our unique ways. But everyone, when people see me, it's because something is stopping them from doing something they want, or something is concerning them. And so at the base level, it's all the same. And you get into the specifics and it becomes different, in terms of what it is that it's stopping them from doing, or, what they're concerned about, or what level they need to get to or achieve. But the bread and butter is the same.
Yeah, for me, a lot of it's nature and nurture, right? So you have that kind of the nature of, we talk about genetics a lot with athletic populations and how they're genetically gifted, but also how much work they've done to get there. And there's going to be general population people who've come in who would have the genetics to achieve, like to be really good at different things. And we see it all the time in different body types as well. We see, I think, I love the Olympics for this, but you look at the Olympics and every sport in the Olympics, like the 100-meter runners, they all look the same, right? The high jumpers, they all look the same.
Swimmers look the same.
Yeah, exactly. So
for sure,
when people do come into the gym, they are going to specifically be better at different things anyway. And maybe their nature would have set them up to be a professional athlete. You just don't always know, do you? But the kind of the environment, their nurture up to the point, maybe it just wasn't something that interested them, and it only interested them to be healthy and fit later on in life. Or it's just that they didn't get pushed into a sport, and luckily enough, were really good at it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's the combination of both that ends up being the elite, isn't it? The people with the nature and the nurture, and then you'll get a few natural talents who are a bit lazy, who will still do pretty well at the sport and may play professional but never reach that top tier, and vice versa. You'll get those real gritty hard workers that maybe didn't have the natural talent but managed to scrape a career out of it. But yeah, I mean, Usain Bolt was designed to run fast, no doubt about it. But there's probably a couple of Usains floating around who never really cared for it.
But he was still originally an outlier. Like he looked different to other 100-meter sprinters, and so people originally didn't think that he would be one of the best.
For sure.
And then, surprise, there you go.
He's
yeah. 100%. And like I do love watching on the social medias of how people look at his movement, and they do tend to be like, oh, he's doing this wrong, he's doing this differently. This is not what everyone else does. But mate, it shows, doesn't it? He is the best at what he does.
Still the man. I think what you're saying there is people breaking him down and going, oh, he's actually got a technical fault here. He should be pronating here. He should be doing this and should be. Mate, come on, he's the fastest there is.
Yeah.
I've just got to go one back thing to you, Simon. And I'm hung up on this. Do you identify as an Aussie or as a Brit?
as an Aussie.
There we go. So it is a 2 Aussie to 1 Brit.
It is.
Oh, is
So I'm
it?
like, I'm outnumbered.
No. I support Australia in sport. I'm Aussie citizen.
Yeah, I haven't got
grew
my
up here.
citizenship yet, but I love Australia as a country. I think it's fantastic.
Yes, we've
Like
brainwashed him.
it's so amazing living here. I feel so lucky, and with all the COVID stuff, I feel extremely lucky to actually be in this country. When speaking to my family over in England, they're like, with how England handled everything to how Australia handled everything. I'm like, wow, I was definitely in the right country at the right time.
Oh, yes.
Didn't sign up for a political podcast.
I'll bring it back on. I had to know. I had to know.
that's
I'll sit
good, I
there
like
feeling weird.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess let's start off at the journey of this injury and when that happens and I don't know when said injury happens. How to segue this into seeing you? I guess like what's the common length? You find someone, or you start to chat to someone. Are you speaking to them like a week after injury, or is it like a month after, or what's commonalities for you?
Look, ideally it would be as soon as possible, but it depends a lot on the individual again, how concerned they are, how busy life is, how much priority they put in this specific injury, how much they actually trust and think that a physio is going to help them. So I see people a day after they get injured. I see people 3 years after they get injured. And sometimes that 3 years has been seeing other health practitioners and bits and pieces, or sometimes that 3 years has honestly been, 2 weeks of ignoring it and thinking it would go away, and then time gets away from you and you've spent 3 years ignoring it and hoping it will go away, and then suddenly your partner gets sick of you whinging, or
Enough is enough.
or you suddenly want to start training for a new goal and it's getting in the way, and so you get drawn. So people come to me all sorts of different time frames post injury, and we can sit there and dwell on you should have come in this time or whatever, but you just got to where are you now, where do you want to get to, and how are we going to figure that out?
What's that initial rapport building like, and that we're getting to understand where they come from and giving them a bit of trust into the process and starting to build the rapport into building a relationship and then getting some effects from what you're doing?
I like it. It's a really enjoyable part of the job, to be honest, meeting new people and getting an understanding of their story, and not just what hurts, but what have you been through, what do you want to do, what's important to you, what's worrying you, and all that sort of thing. I really enjoy that part of it, and there's plenty been said about it in the literature recently about I think in the average kind of medical professional consult you'll get interrupted every 22 seconds or something like, I don't know. I love the saying 90% of statistics are made up. So yeah, I definitely made up that number, but it's short. It's shorter than it should be, and so I think over time I've definitely adapted more to, rather than trying to think about what's the next question I'm going to ask and how do I build rapport and how do I do this and I do that and whatever, is just let someone come in, ask us a very simple question like, what's happening or what's going on, and let them decide what's important to them. Some people dive straight in with, well, I've got a pain in my shoulder, but some people say, oh, not much, I had this with my family on the weekends, blah blah blah, and then it slowly gets towards the shoulder. And
I definitely find some people are more intuitive of their bodies, definitely, and some people kind of like, they come in and they kind of like, some people even seem to know why it might have been caused. Well, some people may be very wrong about why it may have been caused. And also what you find is like some people just need the prompting. We have it in here quite often. Like when we first initially talk to someone, we'll quite quickly say to them, so do you have any pain or injuries anywhere that like they should be addressed with the exercise that we do? And often they'll be like, no. And then we'll say, and I normally just follow through with a quick scan and go, oh, ankles, knees, hips, back, shoulders. And they always come back often with, oh, actually, my shoulder hurts when I do this. Oh, my hip, actually, my low back hurts when I do this. I feel like this is this. So it's always like, sometimes some people need to be prompted, and then other people are really willing to just divulge everything they know about themselves.
I always ask, one of the screening questions when you meet someone new is, have you ever had any surgeries? And sometimes they go, oh, no. Oh, what's that scar on your chin there? Oh, that's when I shattered my tibia and fibula and got 3 rods and 10 screws put in. Oh, yeah,
well,
okay.
That's worthy to note.
Yeah, they managed that pretty well without surgery anyway.
As if a certain time distance away, it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, or, if I'm looking at them for their shoulder, they think it's not relevant. But I think it's still, once again, like it's part of their story, and it is, I want to know it all, and, let me figure out what's relevant.
Because we do look through like a gait lens with lots of our movements as well, that we definitely feel that if you can't take up a certain shape in the shoulder and the rib cage, you probably can't do the same thing in the foot and the hip. So I think it's all definitely, I feel like the whole body is connected.
whole body is connected,
Yeah.
100%.
With conveying that story, I think one of the most interesting things to know about someone is what were they doing prior to lead up to injury? Not just injury, but what was that lookalike program they were on, sport they were playing, or what was happening? Did that volume or that intensity skyrocket? And now we have this acute injury, or was it an impact injury, a trauma
Yeah.
injury, something of that nature? And that's going to give us a lot of information to go off with what to do from there.
Definitely. And I think a lot of people are at least somewhat in tune with that physical stuff, like, oh, did I train more? Did I train less and stuff like that? But what people will also forget about is everything else in life. Have you been more stressed at work? How have you been sleeping?
yeah.
Have the kids been keeping you up? Have you suffered a loss lately? Have you been sick? They say, oh, I've run 5Ks 3 days a week for the past 10 years, but then they were off. They had COVID for 2 weeks, followed by the flu for 2 weeks, and then they did it again. So, all their systems are down, and then they get injured. And they say, well, I didn't change anything. But so looking even broader, so everything leading up to it. And yeah, I think people are starting to get an idea of obviously the physical, and they, like you said, James, they always come in and I reckon it's because I did this at work or whatever. And maybe it is, but you got to get the big picture.
Yeah, and rarely is it that one occasion, that one thing that they did that actually caused the issue. It's normally a build-up of plenty of things, like you just said yourself. And it's kind of like what we spoke about last week with programming. It's that stress management, and stress is coming from every different direction. So it might not be that you did the extra volume in the session. It might be the extra volume of stress that you're handling, like you said yourself, at home. And it's impossible to manage this stuff.
It's hard to quantify.
Yeah. Oh, you definitely can't qualify it. You can't put it down on a piece of paper and be like, oh, that stress level, my wife made me. My kids did this plus 10.
Exactly.
You can't count it, but there's definitely it's nice to know that people were paying attention to that. And when you do understand that that is an issue, then you can action things.
Yeah. You just got to, it just helps to be aware. Like, you can't do anything about it sometimes. And like you said, you can't quantify it, but at least have an understanding of, I'm pretty stressed this week, like I'm going to be kind on myself in the gym. Or,
that old bucket thing, right?
Yeah.
If you're draining the bucket, you got to put more back into it. If you've got a lot of stress going out, you got to start doing some self-care and fill that bucket back up.
Yeah, the simple act of like some sort of meditation, whatever that may be to use, is a really good way to recover from that kind of stress. Yeah, fantastic. Like, and do you notice this a lot with with at the higher level, the athletic level?
Definitely. And I think at the athletic level, it's probably even more so, because the physical stuff's pretty well documented for them. We got sports scientists, we've got strength and conditioning coaches, we've got head of performances. Like, they're making sure, and they're running data and all that sort of stuff to the best of their ability to try and avoid spikes in load, and to also understand the spikes in load we can't control, i.e. the schedule density and travel and that sort of thing. So a lot of that stuff's covered, so it's important that we don't then miss out on the stuff that's happening when they're away from the sport. I mean, elite sport's a full-time job, but they've still got family life, and they've still got home life, and they've still got things going on, and they still drink, and they still stay up late some nights. And I mean, a big thing with us, when we're at the Kings, is we have 3 imports a year, most commonly from America. So their family's on a different time zone. So they're up all night FaceTiming family, and then they've got to come in and do their training and stuff like that. And once again, we're not going to say don't talk to your family, and we can't. I mean, they're in their own room doing what they're allowed to do. But it's important to build that relationship where they feel comfortable enough to tell us without judgment and without chastising that, oh, I've had a few late nights, stuff's going on with the family, so I've had to talk to them for a few nights. And we can just do our best to manage around it.
And they are being paid to perform as well, which can put a pressure on them as well. But at the same time, it also gives them a kind of understanding that they have to recover, and they have to do all these things outside so they can perform in the gym. And sometimes I'd like to see that a bit more with the general population, like them kind of thinking about, oh, how can I recover outside of the gym to then get back in the gym and perform as well as possible.
And we can use this, like in that scenario, it would be talking to the strength conditioning coach, the physiotherapist, say, hey, my body, I'm getting a bit taxed. And the program might change for you. They might drop the volume down. We treat you a bit nicer, and we'll just give you that part to recover and adapt. And at a home setting, it might be talking to your partner or your support network saying, hey, I'm feeling it at the moment, I'm a bit under the weather, I need a bit of help here. And using that support network to hopefully take a bit of the load off you, so then you can recover and then get back to a normal setting as soon as you can.
It's always good to hear from the member when they actually tell you, right, in the gym. And we quite often prompt that at the beginning of sessions, like, how you feeling? Like, how's everything going? And it's always good to hear when someone goes, okay, this, I felt a bit chesty the other day, or I feel I've been really run down with work, so that we can say to them, okay, well, let's get the job done today, but let's not push you too hard. Let's make sure we get a session in. Let's improve anywhere we feel like we can. And sometimes they're going to pick up halfway through the session, be like, actually, I feel fantastic. But other times it's just you got in, you built the habit of getting in, and let's move forward from today.
The
Feeling better.
honesty and communication's huge.
Oh,
To go like, nah, good. I'm tough. I'm good. I'm concrete. And then you just go there and you still try and hit your maxes and you still go hard. And then you end up going, oh, crap, my knee, or oh, crap, whatever. No one wins.
you've just said that, Simon. You just said that, like, when in your initial consultation, like, it's actually probably the most important part of the whole thing, right? That listening to them, asking them questions, prompting things, finding out exactly where they are at this moment, so you can like do the next job and give them what they need.
Definitely. And it's on them to communicate, but it's on us to make sure that it's a friendly environment to communicate. Like, it's got to be judgment free, and it's got to be, you can discuss things and where things might be better or worse. But it's like, if someone comes into me and they haven't done their rehab exercises for 2 weeks, like, it's not my job to get up them for it.
Yeah.
Like, it's not.
And how much is that going to help?
And then in 2 weeks' time, when they still haven't done their rehab exercises, they're going to tell me that they have, because they don't want to get in trouble again.
Yeah, so you're just building an environment where they're lying to you,
more
and
stress,
you're getting nowhere
more
from it.
stress.
Yeah,
I got to know it, and then we can figure out, maybe I've given you too many, or maybe it was just a rough 2 weeks and you're confident you can do them these 2 weeks, or maybe it didn't fit in with your lifestyle, or you didn't see the value in those exercises. Like, we've got to figure it out together. Like, it's not, I don't just tell them what to do and it's drill sergeant. Like, it's their health journey.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just reiterating with them how important the journey is, and reminding them of their goals to the way that they're about to achieve it. And you can kind of then reinforce that, hey, if you do this, and sometimes, yeah, like you said, like, let's do a little bit less. Let's just get it in, knowing that maybe that much load won't get them anywhere, but it'll get them somewhere where they start paying attention to themselves.
Starts the habit anyway.
Yeah, starts the habit, exactly.
I love what you just said. It's their journey, not yours. So you got to find out what works best for them. Like, low hanging fruit, I think, is the best way to sum this up, right? What's that one actionable they can get and build a habit on, and slowly build that snowball and layer those habits. And that's why it's so important to have that, I'm going to see you in a fortnight, I'm going to see you in a month, or that follow up and that catch up to see that progression.
And talking about the environment as well, their environment in which they feel they're comfortable with you to talk to you about what they need to do to achieve their journey, but also the environment they may be doing the exercises in. So, for example, they may be going home to a really busy household. It's very hard for them to step aside and do the exercises. And then we know pretty well that, like, quite often you want to be a little bit more like down-regulated, relaxed when you're performing some of these exercises anyway, to get the benefits out of them. So sometimes it's better that they actually, like, can I help you find a way that you can involve this in? Get to the gym and do it. So when you're at the gym, you pretty much know that you're there to improve yourself, right?
The fun part to maybe explore too is, we're going to go two scenarios: an individual that is themselves quite positive and quite uplifting and has a good environment, versus the individual that's quite negative to themselves and doesn't have that social environment. And their two journeys can be quite, I would say, quite different, and their recovery process and timelines quite different. What have you seen with those type of journeys, Simon?
Yeah, so I mean, once again, it's about, like, all I can hope is to make a positive impact, push them, or not push them, but help guide in a positive direction. So someone who's ticking 90% of the boxes, can I help them tick 95% of the boxes? And someone who's ticking 10% of the boxes, can I help them tick 15% of the boxes? And sometimes, people want to be driven and pushed, and, how can I lift heavier, or how can I push harder, or, is there room for me to do more here? And so with those people, like, I'm going to give them more. And if they're, a little sore, that they respond positive to positive reinforcement of come, and, like, that means it's working, let's go, let's push through it. And then some people need to be nurtured a little bit more. And once again, that's why building the rapport is so important. And it's important to keep checking in on them. Like, if you're giving someone, or, if I'm telling someone to do something, I'll often say, does that work for you? Do you think you can fit that in? Would you rather do 20 minutes of exercise 3 times a week, or 10 minutes of exercise 6 times a week? Like, what works with your schedule there? And it can be the tiniest things. And sometimes it's even, someone goes home, they don't do their exercises. They go back into all the same habits they had, but they've got the mindset of, okay, well, there's someone there to support me. It's going to be okay. Once I've figured a few things out, then they're going to help guide me. And so with all those different journeys, it is different person to person. And obviously, I get joy out of both, seeing someone absolutely down at their, I don't get joy out of seeing someone down at their worst, but if I see
We know
someone
what you
down
mean.
at their worst, I get joy from giving them or helping them find a tiny silver lining to their cloud, and vice versa, getting someone in who's super motivated and ready to go and thrashing them in a session, that gives me joy too.
We often discuss this about the at first, when you first get into training, how much it's all about the physiology, like how much it's like, okay, like let's learn about training, let's learn about how to improve everyone in all these different aspects, let's learn as much as possible about that stuff, and kind of push psychology to the side a little bit, and then later on you realize that it's all psychology. Like every single thing that really matters is their psychology. If you want them to like achieve a higher rep or get more sets, or anything that happens in the gym is about finding where they're at and working with the individual. And in a group training environment, it can be harder than like normal, just one
Yeah.
on one. But if anything, it's improved our skills massively with that. And you could just have to understand that even in a group environment, every single person is their own individual, and they need a different approach with everything.
Language is so important. It massively is. And I'll go a bit more into what you just said in a group setting, because language can be tailored to the individual. Like we were saying earlier, different individuals will respond to different things. For us in a group setting, I'm going to say, what can I say effectively that will affect 80% of the room? And that 20%, I'll grab you individually. The best thing about yourself, Simon, that one-on-one journey, like you can tailor your language to that person to make sure they're getting they're hearing the right things and they're getting the right stimulus out of your prompts.
Yeah, and as a coach or a physio, you build that intuition. You start recognizing patterns of
Experience.
when someone walks in. You can see the way they're holding themselves, or the way they're walking, and the way they first like start the dialogue with you, or instantly you start figuring out the person better and better and better. And it's something you can't really put on pen and paper, right? You can't write that down. People have, but better people than myself. And something you can't really put down on pen and paper, but you start learning individuals much better, right?
Definitely, and it helps to open the conversation. But I think that, and I've been guilty of this definitely in the past, you start to maybe overtrust your intuition a bit, and someone comes in looking a bit mopey, and you're like, okay, they're down, and you try and hold them back, and they actually smash the session. So it's always important to still ask. Someone comes in a bit, and you're like, oh, you look a bit tired today, or you look a bit down. Is everything good? They're like, oh yeah, sorry, I was just distracted. Like I'm ready to go. It's like, okay, so I was wrong. Like
I was just so in my head about how hard I'm going to crush this session.
Exactly. So it's important. Yeah. So I think definitely, and I mean, in your group setting, it would be more so because you can't go around and ask every single person, every single exercise, how they feel, what's happening. But so you need to build and trust that intuition. But I think like keep communication number one, and don't try and be a mind reader. And
100%,
I ask more and more through sessions, and even things that sound like stupid questions of just like, they've told me about their injury and stuff, and say, all right, well, so what do you want to get out of today? Because maybe they want some exercise, and maybe they want a massage, maybe they want, and it's my job to help guide them towards what would be most appropriate. But like we said, it's their
There's that
health
middle
journey,
ground
and,
as well.
like I need to know where they're at, so I can meet them there and we can figure it out together.
We discussed the need and the want is quite different. You kind of know a bit more about what they might need from seeing other people progress, but what they want, and can we find the middle ground between need and want? So they feel like they got what they wanted, but at the same time you gave them what they needed.
100%. That's that first initial talk, right? The screening, you find out their info. Like programming wise, like for us in the gym, we might be going to those big effective compounding movements, but having those auxiliary movements in there that like people just love, it's great to feed that in there at the lower pecking order. Like throwing a bit of arms in there for a bunch of young blokes, oh, they're going to love it. Get a finish on that sort of stuff. It's such a high and that little dopamine rush at the end, and it makes that buy-in process so much higher as well.
Simon, do you ever have to like pull someone away from a certain exercise, for example, because maybe they have too much buy-in to that one particular exercise?
Love this.
If they're coping well with it, then I would say no.
Yep.
If they love it, then great. I wouldn't pull them away from it, but I think I'd just try and help them make sure that they're getting what they need in other aspects and areas. Obviously, if it's giving them pain and injury, then they might need a period of deload. But my goal would always be would be to help them get back to the amount of that exercise they want to do. If they want to be an ultra marathon runner, then cool. But if they've got a bone stress injury at that time or whatever, or a tendon injury at that time, they might need to drop their running for a period and build up, and maybe they're not getting enough resistance-based exercise in their week, so I'll help them get that. But no, I'd try not to pull someone away from an exercise they love, because it's definitely better to be exercising rather than being super picky on what exercises you do, trying to do ones you don't like and then not
Yeah.
exercising as
Build on
much.
that slightly. I know. I think this is a point maybe you want to go next. Is when someone has an injury and say an exercise worked for them that time and progressed them well, and then they move on, they get well and all that sort of stuff. But say they get another injury again, they default back to that exercise. I've seen this multiple times. They go, "Oh, this is the one thing that always does it for me." And I've seen individuals that are just in perpetual that loop. It's always, for example, throwing a ball into the side of the hip or to the bum or whatever.
Yeah.
This is what releases my glutes,
Mhm,
quotation marks. And they're just in that perpetual pattern. This is what I always need. Do you still tackle that the same way? Or if they're happy to have that, you're like, okay, so be it. Or do you try and influence their mindset to something that might be a little bit more productive?
Yeah, and sometimes, and you can't change people's minds with a lot of things, but you can help them find the answer themselves. And so with that sort of thing, if it's I release my glute every morning because that's what gets my glute free, you kind of poke them in the direction of, okay, well, then why do you need to do it the next morning
Yeah.
and the next morning after that? And if it feels good, do it. But let's look if there's some other things that you can do along with that might help prolong that effect. And so once again, yeah, I would never tell someone don't roll or don't use a trigger ball or whatever. But I think it's pretty low value in the broader scheme of things. And so I'm just going to try and help them find higher value. So the only times when those exercises become inappropriate is if they get in the way. So if it's I only have 5 minutes in the morning and I use
Yeah.
that 5 minutes to roll, okay, well, let's do one morning where you roll, one morning where you do this specific exercise or whatever. But if they've got 30 minutes and they roll for 5 minutes and then watch TV for 25 minutes, let's say, okay, sweet, roll for 5 minutes. And while the TV's on, spend 20 minutes doing these couple of exercises. So, yeah, I think let them do the things that feel good as long as they're doing no harm. But let's try and see if there are other ways to get a more prolonged effect or a wider spread effect.
There was a very recent study that came out, and they were talking about the long static holds, static stretches.
Mhm.
And they're actually talking about how a long static stretch, for example, can be beneficial, especially to those that maybe have been bedridden for a while, have lost a lot of muscle tissue, or are much older and haven't done any strength training for a long time. Because we kind of know now that actually the static stretch can be done with weight, for example. So exactly on your point, Simon, it's like you might be doing one thing that might really help you, and it might be perfect for that person at that point in time. But then later on, as someone gets stronger, the stimulus may need to be upped.
Mm.
It may need to be
Yeah.
ramped up. So therefore, like someone that has developed some decent muscle tissue, maybe it is the right time for them to do a static stretch. But they're probably going to get, say, think of it for a hamstring stretch, for example, like a sit on your bum, legs out in front, toe touch. Probably a better option for most people if they have strength trained, and especially you'll probably see that with your athletic population, is actually they're going to be better off doing something like an RDL,
Mhm.
something where it actually is loaded and actually challenging them tissues.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the thing is, and this is what's been starting to be found recently, is the muscle doesn't know what's loading it.
Yeah.
So the muscle doesn't know if you're stretching it or putting weight through it or whatever. All it knows is the amount of force going through it
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
position that it's in. So an RDL will get it into the same position that a leaning hamstring stretch will, but it will increase the load through it. So the adaptation to it is going to be greater. And so once again, if someone like stretching their hammies and they feel good after they stretch their hammies, then do it. But if they're trying to get as much positive adaptation out of their hammies as they can, then there are better ways to do it. And a loaded eccentric might be that answer, or depending on what they want. If they want rate of force development, it might be something with a bit more speed involved. But yeah, if you're talking about kind of lengthening or being strong at length, then a loaded isometric might be the better option.
Perfect.
I love it.
Yeah, I love
could
it.
open up
I
a
think we
bag of
open.
worms.
Should we go into the first question?
Oh, you want to shift to that? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, 'cause I think it just rolls in perfectly.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is the bag of worms. Let's
Yeah.
do it.
So
All right.
Oh,
no, you
God.
go. No, you go.
Okay, I want to go whole name. This is from Jenny. She's saying strength versus mobility, range of motion during rehab, how to balance between the two to get the best outcomes.
I think we pretty answered it
Oh,
just
yeah.
in a little bit. But
Let's build on it.
We
This is a
got,
fun one.
yeah, we did get close. Basically, I mean, if you think about if we want to use the dreaded word functional, functional mobility is the movement.
And then mobility as well. That word Like,
Yeah, I know. We're dealing with a few.
It's hard when you have
words
to
here.
use any language like that, really, isn't it?
I
And
think
what
we're
first,
going to need 17 follow-up podcasts to this just to check
How many words have
everything
been
that we've
hijacked,
said.
right?
yeah,
But yeah, like if you talk about what mobility you need function, it's the range available at a joint to do what you want to be able to do. Now, people have potentially kind of gone a bit crazy with it and gone with real specific mobility exercises. And these are 20 exercises to get your hips mobile enough to do a squat, and these are 20 exercises to get your ankles mobile enough to do a squat, and do the 45 minutes of this before you start squatting. Well, probably one of the best ways to put your ankles and hips into the position needed for squatting is to squat. And that's going to get you into that position. And so I don't think it's an either or. I think strength training through range is probably one of the most effective, definitely time efficient, probably most effective ways to target both. And then if there is one, whether it's strength or mobility that seems to really be stopping you and you're hitting a roadblock there, that's when you might do a little bit of top up work for that one body part. But yeah, I think you're going to get most of your strength and mobility goals. And this is talking general population. You're going to get most of your strength and mobility goals from strength training through range. If you're an elite athlete population and you're trying to get 1% better and 1% better really matters, then we need to maybe dive a little bit deeper. But if 1% here and there in your mobility or your strength isn't going to change your life, then do things that are going to affect both and that are going to get as much bang for your buck as possible.
I totally agree. And I'd start off with like mobility, for example. What does that person think of as mobility, right? Do they think they need to have these extreme range of motions for their shoulders and hips? Because some people, like there's many factors to mobility, right? Your gender will play a factor, genetics, like we discussed earlier, all these, your mood that day, that can stiffen you up. Like your stress levels can stiffen you up. And sometimes like mobility is going to come from relaxing. Sometimes it's going to come from just getting some blood flow around the body. So if it is 5-10 degrees, sometimes that's where we're going to get it. Like the warm up at the beginning of the session quite often provides it to people. I also think though, when it comes to mobility, people forget like the kind of the structure that they're in. So we do kind of know that like where your rib cage is and where your pelvis is going to play a massive important role. And like talking about the Olympics earlier, there's certain shapes that are going to make better positions.
Yeah.
You definitely must know that from basketball, right?
Absolutely.
They all look the same.
Just like limb length, like think of basketball players, their limb length is going to decide how well they can squat or hinge and move. Like the difference between the tibia and the femur is going to play a role.
For sure. And once again, that's why it becomes goal specific. Like there are a lot of players in AFL and soccer because if you grow up playing those sports with a lot of kicking, you tend to develop a bit of thickness at the top of your thigh bone, which can limit your hip range of motion. It's a bony mobility block. So you can stretch all you like and it's not going to go anywhere. And, a lot of these guys can't squat past parallel, but who cares?
Yeah.
You can build glute and quad and trunk strength without squatting past parallel, and you don't need to squat past parallel to play AFL football. If they suddenly wanted to be an Olympic lifter, they'd probably have to have a bit of a tough conversation about, look, your hips can't do it. And, short of going nuts and getting
some
someone
really
to
big
open
heel
you up
wedges on them shoes.
Oh,
yeah. Short of, going nuts and someone opening you up and shaving that bone away, like you're not going to change it. So, yeah, with those mobility things, and, we have examples at the Kings with guys who, because of previous ankle injuries, have kind of changes to their bone and morphology in the ankle where, their knee to wall, which is a common measure of ankle mobility, is 3 centimeters. And all the literature suggests that adults should have about 12 centimeters. And, I can mobe their ankles, they can stretch their calves, they can do mobility, 4 hours a day for the rest of their life, and it will not change.
We also have the topic of like performance and health, right? Like where these guys might want to be, we kind of we see that ankle range of motion is limited when people are actually in that position that they want to be getting. So for example, if I'm lean forward with my center of mass, I'm so far forward over my toes, then I actually had to have some dorsiflexion, which is the closing of the angle between the shin and the foot. So if I'm an athlete who is ready to go most of the time, then I'm going to naturally shift my weight more forward and it's going to be beneficial to my sport. Whereas in maybe more general populations, we can actually normally bring that center of mass back a little bit, which instantly opens up the ankle joint. It's where you are at that time. I think that's it's a completely different conversation topic, but it's kind of the posture and the ability to shift into other postures.
Yeah, a nice one to say with that. You can't go where you already are.
Yeah.
If your body is already orientated at the end range of that position, how can you go deeper into that position when you're already there?
Yeah,
So
and
learning how to manage, again, this is, you just said, a whole nother thing, manage their position, influence it to more of a, I hate this word, more of a neutral position. We can give them more of a left and right of arc to create more movement options.
And I feel like athletes are going to lose range of motion in certain places, like you said in the femur as well. But that's how they're going to get the most out of their sport as well.
It's a positive adaptation.
Yeah,
so
of course.
that
Yeah,
their
it
hip
makes them
can-
better.
Yeah, their hip can
Gets them a
tolerate
bigger
change
wage.
of direction, change of direction.
Great
loads
question
and whatnot.
from Jenny, and just to kind of like maybe summarize Jenny's question up, like mobility can be achieved through intelligent strength programming and generally tailored to the individual. I would use some different kind of demographics there, from basketball players to, you could say, sprinter, to just general population just wanting to be healthy. Good strength programming can cover mobility. You don't necessarily need to be doing we said like a 45-minute hour just stretch session. We can do this loading that tissue and have some good stimulus from that and kind of get, what's the old saying? 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's the right load for the right tissue, right? Like some tissues aren't going to be, maybe I haven't loaded that tissue previously, then I'm going to have to hold back on the load at this time and then work forward. And then other tissues that have been loaded a fair bit, they can handle more load.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if you love stretching, do it. But I haven't
Yeah.
met too many people in that boat, so don't
Yep.
feel like
Yes.
you have to do too much.
But sadly, we do often see people who stretch for so long.
Yeah.
We just witness them stretching like continuously, like hanging around, stretching for 30, 40 minutes after
But
sessions.
you got to figure out, or that's always that question of, is it because they love it, or is it because they've been scared into thinking they have to do it? And so, have that conversation.
totally.
If they love it, then go for it. Whatever floats your boat.
Next one. This is, I'm just going to summarize this one up really quick. This is more of a broader one. Plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendinitis, and let's just start with that. So maybe some general considerations with plantar fasciitis and Achilles tendinitis. There's like 5 things in this one sentence, so we'll just start with those 2.
Well, I'll start by being real Poindextery and nitpicky and say that we've dropped the itis off of both of those words. So itis in Latin or whatever is inflammation. And we know that the primary, or at least the evidence suggests the primary driving factor to plantar fascia pain and Achilles tendon pain is not inflammation, but the stress of the cells around that area. They're quote unquote overload injuries, which I guess gets us into a really deep bag about what is overload injury. It tends to be where the loads placed on that tissue is more than what it's really to tolerate at the moment. So we know that the body will adapt to loads that you place on it, provided that you build those up appropriately over time, and you allow the time for that positive adaptation. So, for example, tendons and your plantar fascia, which for all intents and purposes, general population just think of it like a tendon as well, doesn't have the same level of blood supply as, say, a muscle has. So the time it takes to build muscle is quicker than the time it takes to build tendon adaptation. So what these will commonly come in, and like we talked about before, is it'll come following a change. So it's someone who suddenly decides they want to run the City to Surf 6 weeks out and starts running 30 Ks a week, when before that they did maybe 5 Ks every second week. And that those tendons or those tissues are not ready for that load, and so they get painful and irritated. And so the way to deal with them is find the load they can tolerate that's going to generate a positive adaptation. So if you just rest it, the tendon's going to go back to being what it was, which is fine for what you were doing, but not enough for what you want to be doing.
And rest can be hard as well. Like with a job that is active. If you say, for example, you're standing on your feet all day long or walking around, especially with for example, I know this person. I know that she does have an active job. So how would you go about if you get the pain without any excessive loads, and it's probably your day to day that causes the issue?
Yeah, it's challenging, and so there's 2 kind of ways. That one is we need to find ways to load it to create positive adaptation. And that is generally with tendons and those sorts of soft tissues is generally through slow, heavy resistance training, because they're kind of movements that don't put a heap of impact through the tendon.
Isometrics as well.
And isometrics is a form of that, and isometrics got a bit of an exciting rap based on one or two studies, but basically it's just slow, heavy
It's the
load
same
that's
thing,
not
right?
impacting. Yeah,
Yep.
and look, and you play around with it. If they can't tolerate going up and down, but they can tolerate an isometric, great.
Yeah,
Or
the
vice
range
versa.
that they prefer, kind of thing.
Exactly. And then the other thing is there are some modifications and kind of adjuncts and things like that that can help. And so you can play around with them. So that might be like something that supports the arch, like a prefabricated orthotic or a taping, or it might be a heel wedge so that their lift is up a little bit, or more supportive shoes, or bits and pieces like that. And you can play around with those, but they're not fixes. The idea is, think of it like a cast for a broken bone. You pop it on there to help make life more comfortable while you're building the capacity of those tendons, and then you take the adjunct away.
I love that you said that. I
Mhm.
think that's so fantastic because I speak to a lot of people who have, for example, insoles, and they've worn them for 7 years,
yeah.
worn 7 years ago. And I was like, when you are getting things like insoles, it's a plan. It's a part of a plan, right? Well, most often than not, right? Sometimes there's going to be different situations.
Yeah, there's always going to be different situations, but if they've had if they've got insoles in for the rest of their life because they feel really comfortable, then once again, it's not doing any harm.
Yeah.
But if they've got insoles in because they had plantar fascia pain 7 years ago and they've just been, frightened to take them out since, well, that's probably not ideal. And so you want to try and help educate them around what that means and seeing if they can wean it off, because it's going to help them in the broader sense get a bit more confidence in their body and its ability to kind of
Normally the kind of the situation I've seen with this is where they've been to the physiopathologist and they've been given an insole and it's worked. And it's fantastic, but they haven't gone up for a follow up. They haven't gone back.
Yeah,
So you're supposed to go back. You're supposed to keep the progress going. I know it's fixed, and we see this all the time with things that do work. For example, like someone does a certain exercise that really helps them, and we see all the times when our guys go to, like, for example, the physio. They've done a couple of physio exercises and they've helped. They've taken the pain away, but then they just stop. That takes the pain away. And like you said, Mitch, earlier, when they go back to that, well, you're not progressing. You're not getting further away from the issue. And the aim should be to get as far away from that issue as possible, to be that doesn't become an issue again, hopefully.
Like if that red line is pain and we just get past and yeah, I'm out of pain now. Why stop just there? We want to keep progressing. There's more to be done.
Pain's a hell of a motivator, isn't it?
Yeah.
People are pretty keen to see you when it hurts, and then they forget all about it after. And it's understandable. It drops down the priority list of their life. But
like, life is hard. I understand,
So we try and we give them as much info as we can. And sometimes after maybe a couple of flare-ups, they say, okay, how can we deal with this long-term? And we go through that. But
I think that's really well answered.
I loved it. Oh, is ready for a big one? Lovely Eliza here.
Yep.
Is rice still relevant? Rest, ice, elevation, compression, elevate.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were talking about as a carb source.
It's my favorite carb source.
It is. And so we've got a new acronym because we love acronyms in injury management and things like that, and doctors ABC and all the rest of it. It's POLICE now, so POLICE, which is protect, optimize load. Yep, that's OL.
Here we go.
Ice, compression, elevation. And so the rest has been replaced with protect and optimize load, because I think the rest has been often misinterpreted to mean stop everything.
Yeah.
What it really means is what we call relative rest, which is find a way to stop overloading the tissue that's bothered, but keep loading everything around it. And in fact, keep loading the tissue that's bothered, but only within an appropriate amount. So that's what protecting and optimizing load is taking harmful, or maybe not even harmful, but provocative load away from it, but keeping healthy load through it. Ice is fine. It's become more polarizing than it needs to be. Basically, people thought we could ice because we could cool the tissue and stop inflammation. We can't. People then came from the other side and said, well, inflammation's a normal part of the healing, so ice is bad for it. It's not. Because basically the amount of cooling that goes down to the tissue from icing the surface of your skin is negligible. And so ice can help with pain management and is a non-harmful way to help with pain management. So if ice feels good, use ice. If it doesn't feel good, don't stress. Compression compression and elevation probably do influence inflammation a little bit more. And so they're probably a little bit more relevant. But even then, I mean, I'd go with compression, because elevation once again gives you the idea of sitting on the couch with your feet up, and do that after exercise for sure. But yeah, make sure you're getting that optimal load through there. So I think the POL is probably the most important part. C, compression is something I do kind of recommend a lot, and not because I think it's a silver bullet, but I mean, wrapping something on your legs, no harm done. And then ice and elevation is probably a little bit more optional in my mind.
And oh, fantastic! Yeah, beautiful. And Eliza had another question off the back of that as well. She says, "Can you successfully cross train through injury, or does it slow the recovery time?"
Well, that's
Yeah,
the POL, isn't it?
that's it.
Loved it.
Definitely cross train. If you're keeping your system healthy and you're giving it reasons to adapt, and positive protein synthesis and all of that, that's all going to be positive for injury. I think the most important, or it's important to make sure that you find out what your injured tissue can and can't cope, and that you're not going beyond that, because that will slow down injury. But training around it, definitely, I mean, training around it might not speed it up, but definitely will not slow it down. And then most importantly, loading that tissue appropriately will speed it up.
And the load appropriately is really interesting as well, because there's so many different ways to load a tissue, right? Like
Yeah.
it can be like we just discussed, slow range of motion through the whole thing. It can be isometrics. It can be the weight that you're using. It can be the volume that you load with a lighter weight, and it can be actually plyometric type stuff where we do get a bit more tendon work. And like it, that's the specific reason of when you do have an issue that you do see someone like Simon, for him to then look at the kind of the strength load, the the work that you should be doing, or what type of movements you should be doing for that specific is the word there, injury.
Yeah.
issue.
That's my job. That's what I tell people. There's so many exercises out there, and it's funny how often I'll see someone with, say, for example, knee pain, and I'll say, okay, let's do some squats in the clinic, see if you can cope with it. Like, nah, that'll be sore. And then we do it. Like, oh, that was actually all right. Or, vice versa. We'll try something, and that's like, there's a bit of trial and error to it, but I'd like to think there's a bit of a method to my madness, and it's not, you don't have to try every exercise and figure it out. And so that's what I'm here to help with.
What I think is really important to touch on, because it's just the way the processes are done. Unfortunately, someone might get injury, and the first protocol might not be to go someone like to yourself, which I think it should be, but they might go see their GP. And there's a lot of old school head GPs out there that are probably still on that rice kind of thing, and they'll stop the individual right there, and the process stops there. Go home, put the foot up, don't do anything. But hopefully, with like some of this new acronym coming out, the police acronym, that they shift someone to like you, and then we can get these people moving straight away, and then they get halted in do nothing, stop going to the gym, do nothing, like just stay static until you heal. So that kind of just funnel of how it goes from injury to GP, then hopefully to someone like yourself, and then you refer to or you chat to their coaches or whatever it happens to be. That first one, the GP, and if you do get that bit of information, that feedback, I would.
Well,
And their information is very important, but do maybe go out and speak to someone like a Simon for that extra opinion, and maybe a way that can manage your load or manage what you're going through.
and I would question that straight away, because I feel like when people do have things like knee injuries, like what's to actually stop them from doing pressing and pulling with the upper body? Like you can still be getting some physical activity, and you can still work towards most goals.
For sure. And I think GPs get brought up a lot in this sort of thing. And the thing is, people are, they don't know the X, Y, Z about the knee or whatever. But I mean, why would you? They deal with literally everything, a lot of which can be life-threatening, and a knee injury can't. So I'd much prefer a GP that knows far more about things that could kill me than about my musculoskeletal system. But we have a lot of really good GPs in the local area. We're just up in Lewisham where I practice, who we've got relationships now, and they know their first point of call is, hey, you've got this musculoskeletal issue. We've ruled out to the best of our ability anything crazy, anything life-threatening, or that needs immediate surgical review or imaging review. Go see the physio. They're better placed to manage this with you, and I think that works. And it's same with the relationship we have with you guys. Like, you never, like, referring people to someone good reflects positively on you.
100%.
And so no one goes, oh, that GP didn't help me at all. All they did was say, see the physio. They say, oh, GP was great. They sent me to this place that's really helped me through my injury. So next time I feel something, or, I've got a cough or whatever, then I'm going to go back to that GP because they really know where to send you or if they can help you.
And it definitely comes down to scope of practice, right? Like
Mm.
people do need to know their scope of practice, as well as trainers, physios, and obviously GPs as well. And there is issues in the gym quite often where we will get someone who like represents a little bit of knee pain in a squat, for example. And sometimes it's just a simple change of like giving them a slight wedge or something. It's like,
Mm.
oh, nothing anymore.
Yep.
Well, that may not be a cause to see a physio, but if something is like becoming like has become chronic and it has been lasting for a while, would you agree, Simon? And then probably if it's something that you care about enough to sort it out and want to see your progress push forward, then that's got to be the time to go, right?
For
Or
sure.
whenever suits you, really. But
Yeah, well, for sure. And I think like there's absolutely nothing wrong with trying a bit of that trial and error, and you might find the answer yourself. But if you're struggling to find that answer and the questions are rolling through your head and it all seems a bit much, like that's my job. We'll figure it out together. And it's not about me sitting there and saying, "Oh, you must do this, must do that." It's about figuring out what your goals are, where you're at, trying a few things that I think are most likely going to be appropriate, figuring out if they are, and then building.
Nice. To me, I'd love you to dive deeper into this story. Oh God, I'm going to butcher his name, and I don't want to butcher his name. DJ
Vasilijevic.
Vasilijevic. Thank you. You jumped in nice, beautiful. And this is like I'll just let you take the story from here.
Mm.
All I know is superficial information. Achilles rupture to like hero of the Kings. It might be a bold statement, but there we go.
I think it's warranted, and I think he'd be very pleased to hear you say that. Yeah, it was a tough one for him.
Shout out to DJ.
As far as I know, that was his first major time loss injury, and it's an injury that is pretty easy to clinically diagnose. So he kind of, and I mean, he knew it. It was funny. He kind of shouted to his family, who were about 20 rows back, "I've ruptured my Achilles," and I was like, "Don't." Just wait. Can we assess you first before you tell the first 20 rows of the King's crowd that you're out for a year? So we went back to the rooms and confirmed it, and so that was obviously shattering. And he's a young, very, very good player with obviously high ambitions, hopes and dreams, boomers, NBA and stuff like that, and really wanted to make a statement that season. So to see that whole rehab through, and it's something that I do really like about working in pro sport is how much you see them through that. You don't see them once every week or once every 2 weeks or once every month. You see them almost daily, and seeing his ability, and you talked about psychology a bit before, his ability to switch his mindset from I can't play for what could be up to a year to, okay, what can I do? What goals can I achieve? How can I get better? How can he's an elite. I mean, he's up there as one of the best, if not the best shooter in the NBL. So his arm still worked. Like he was shooting shots from a chair.
Oh, fantastic.
Next day. And so seeing his mindset about what can I achieve and really pushing to do the next thing. And he's one that, like we said before about the two different spectrums, he was the one that you could push. And, if he felt like there was 1% extra that you weren't giving him to do, like he was trying to find it. He's like, well, if we can do this, why can't we do this? Why can't we do this? And you love seeing that, because I want to be the guy, like I want to be almost pulling someone back because they're too keen, and seeing that passion and that drive. And he obviously put the hard work in, and like you said, hero for the Kings, massive in the final series. He then went and played summer league in for Phoenix. He then went and represented the Boomers in our qualifying games just gone in Bahrain. Like this is all within a year or a year and a half post massive injury, and it comes down to his mindset with it and how he was able to get on with the job and ride those ups and downs. So yeah, really cool to see. And we've had a few stories like that. We had a guy who's had 4 separate ACL injuries and was massive in our final series as well. We've had a guy who did a significant injury in his foot, and he missed a season and came back, and he's been, he won finals MVP. So we've had guys miss seasons
Huge.
and see them go through all that, and we take very little credit. Like you see what they do and what they're willing to do, and you just help with a touch of guidance.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, and not being defined by your injury. That's some tragic stuff. You could say, "Oh no, I'm done. My whole career's over." But to have that attitude to go, "Okay, what can I do? What can I do?" looking for those small bits of adaptation, staying positive. They had a good support network the whole time. We're achieving all those little 1%ers and keeping you accountable for them to be accountable. And then going tragic injury, getting better, taking all the 1%ers to absolutely achieving success and getting probably past where they were before injury, right? Getting the highest pinnacle of their success. That's amazing.
Yeah, definitely using it as an experience to learn from and then push further forward. And I'm sure he'll help other people later on down the line in the team with experiences similar, right? Like, so he becomes a bit of a leader, like as someone who like you can look up to with the stuff like that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Shout out to DJ, long-term listener of the podcast.
I'll try and force him to listen to this.
Well done.
Excellent. Anything extra, boys?
That's it for me, Simon.
Nah, I feel like I've ranted and raved enough about things I believe in. So,
Mate, an absolute pleasure to
Maybe
listen to
wrap
it.
it up.
Real pleasure, mate. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. Guys, remember to like, subscribe. Mate, let us know if you want to dive into any other topics, any other guests that you like us to have on. It's been a pleasure, Simon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the coffee.
Cheers, Simon.
See you guys.